Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. So we had to hear a lot about our democracy, our sacred democracy, the place, where all of the magic, the authority of the people is concentrated. This is what matters. We need to abolish the Electoral College. We need to completely radically change the Senate. We need to expand the Supreme Court so ultimately democracy can reign supreme. Now, a lot of people figured out that our democracy actually means the institutions the left control. So when they're very concerned about our democracy, the democratic process, that's not really what they mean. They don't mean the will of the people. They just mean the experts we've approved and the institutions we control putting out the information that we believe to be correct. It is the bureaucracy in many ways that is our democracy. But at the same time, the response you get from a lot of people on the right, a lot of conservatives, is, whoa, 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 we're not a democracy, we're a republic, right? That's a very different thing. We're not a democracy, we're a republic. It says so in the Constitution. It's a republic if you can keep it, right? The Benjamin Franklin quote that is so popular. But what is the difference, right? If you watch Fox News coverage of the election, it was our democracy 2024, basically. There's like, the democratic process. They use democracy in it. So even news outlets that are kind of leaning to the right talk about democracy as if it is the guiding principle. And let's be honest, even though a lot of conservatives throw around republic, it's a republic. They can't really tell you the difference. I was a school teacher. I taught the different forms of government. When we taught the different forms of government, the only difference in the text between a republic and a democracy was that a democracy was a direct democracy in the sense of all the people voted all the time on every issue. And a republic was one that has representatives. It's still a democracy in every sense, except you don't have the people voting directly on each issue. You send representatives and they vote on the issues. But that's not exactly correct. If we look back at the different definitions of republics throughout history, this isn't even approaching a correct understanding of what republics are. And yet, if you talk to the average conservative, or even many conservatives higher up on the food chain in the political establishment or the commentariat, you'll get basically the same answer. If you ask them, okay, what's a republic? They don't really have any different answer than they get taught in high school. And so today I wanted to break down what a republic actually is. Let's look at antiquity. Let's look at the founders. Let's look at everybody in between and say, what are the different things that make up a republic? What makes it separate from a democracy? Is there any difference between a republic and a democracy? And if that's the case, does America qualify in its current state as a republic? And if so, can we keep it? And if not, can we go back? What would that take? We're going to get to all that, guys, but before we do, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor. Hey guys, if you're looking to break into the world of fully remote jobs, I want you to listen closely. There's a new job stacking program focused solely on how to land remote jobs, even if you don't have any remote work experience. The new Remote Work Mastery program is designed to get you to successfully implement the strategies that allow you to leverage your current skill set, whatever that happens to be, into a fully remote role. No need to learn any new complicated skills like coding or finance. This is all centered around what you already have experience with. There are a lot more remote job opportunities in today's marketplace that go beyond the typical IT job set. The job stacking team will walk you through the entire process of identifying suitable remote positions that adjust to your experience, optimizing your resume, and acing your job interview so that you're set up for success in the world of remote work. So if landing a remote job is something that you're interested in, go to jobstacking.com/masterremote and schedule a call with Rolf today. All right, so let's start from the beginning. What is a republic? What's a republic? If you look at the definitions online or in a dictionary at this point, the modern definitions, if you even go to Wikipedia or something like that, which isn't an official source, but it's what a lot of people, this is the popular understanding. That's what we're working with here before we get to the technical. if you look at these definitions, almost uniformly it says a republic is a state that is governed by the people or in the interests of the people. It often talks about representation in there, the people are represented, and many of them sneak in that these people have been elected or selected by the people, though a decent source will note that in many republics, that is simply not the case. There are people who represent the public, but that doesn't mean that they've necessarily been elected. Now, in modern terms, in a liberal modern republic, that is the understanding, but that is not the understanding throughout history. In fact, if we look at the different terms that are even thrown around today, it can't exactly be right. Think about it. You've got Plato's republic. Well, that's a system where the philosopher kings rule, right? And then you've got like a United States style republic. You've got republic, the USSR was a republic. The Roman Empire is a republic in those senses, right? And so in a lot of ways, there have been many different states that claim to be a republic, but have vastly different ways of ruling their government. Not just because you call yourself a republic, I guess, doesn't mean that you are one. But the point is that even in those that we think of as more credible, like not North Korea, but some of these other states like Plato's Republic and the Roman Republic and the United States Republic, they have very, very, very different forms of government, very different ways they select their leaders, and so the term is not very clear in that sense. If you look through the literature, people will claim that, say, the different Phoenician city-states under the Persians might have been republics, or Israel under the judges might have been a republic. Really, the most common universal definition of republic is simply a state that is not a monarchy, which really tells you how ubiquitous monarchy has been throughout history, because in many cases, a republic is simply something in opposition to a monarchy. It could be an Islamic republic. It could be a Christian republic. It could be a liberal republic. It could be a classical republic. Just things that aren't kingdoms, really. Things that are not monarchical are in some ways a republic. Now, I don't think that is specific enough for our understanding here, but just to give you a kind of the breadth of the issue that we're looking at, so many different types of governments have been called a republic throughout history, and I think this adds to a large amount of confusion when people are attempting to try to parse what a republic is. All right, so if a republic isn't just like people being elected and then representing you, what is a republic? Well, let's go back to the basics. Let's go to the fundamental categories of government under Aristotle, right? Aristotle gives us this idea of three basic forms of government, which kind of break into six forms of government depending on if they are for or against the good. So the three different types of government are rule of one, the autocracy, rule of a few, the oligarchy, and rule of the many, democracy, right? You have these three types of governments based on how many people are ruling. These are your three most basic categories: one, many, or all, right? Or one, few, and many, sorry. And so those are your three basics. Now, Aristotle then breaks these into whether or not those governments are ruling in the service of the people, in the service of the general good, or if they're running for self-interest. So if you are ruling for the good, and you are one leader, then you are a monarch. But if you are ruling for your own interest and you are one leader, then it's a tyranny. If you are ruling for the interest of the whole, but it's in the hands of a few leaders, that's an aristocracy. But if you are ruling in the interest of your own class instead of the general people, and it's a few leaders, then you have an oligarchy. And finally, if you have the rule of the good, for the good, for the whole, the public interests, and it's a lot of leaders, then it's a polity. And then if it's rule for the for their own interests, and not for the good, and it's many leaders, then you have democracy. All right. You're going to notice that nowhere in here is the word republic, right? As we understand it, the res publica, the public affair or public issue, which is kind of the etymology of the republic. Now, the government that Aristotle probably would have pointed to, that would have been what we are thinking of or aiming at, is the polity, right? The polity, and this is what Americans think of probably when they're thinking of a republic, though they may not think of exactly where it came from. The polity is the kind of fusion between oligarchy and democracy. It's not completely the rule of the few, but it is not completely the rule of the many. It definitely isn't a monarchy, so that's out, right? It's definitely not rule of one, but it's fusing aspects of the rule of the few and the rule of the many, leaning towards democracy, leaning towards the rule of the many. And for Aristotle, this is what he calls one of the constitutional governments, right? The governments that are mainly led by constitutions, though you can have constitutions and monarchies and these things, and we'll get to that. Like, what does a constitutional monarchy count as, right? Is the UK, is it a republic? Is it a monarchy? We'll get to that in a second. But the point is that the polity fuses the many and the many and the few, and it does so with the need to try to mix the concerns of all the different classes of society. It wants to mix the interests of the rich with the interests of the poor. It really is often called the rule of the middle, right? The rule of the middle class is ultimately what comes to dominate in a lot of these polities. And so the idea is that if you can bring these interests together, you have a mixed constitution, right? You have some of the authority of an executive that would exist in a monarchy. You have some of the authority that would exist in an aristocracy. And then you have some of the authority that would exist in the democracy. When you mix these all together, you kind of get the polity. And this is what a lot of people are aiming for when they think of as a republic, is this mixed constitutional government with elements of different aspects of your society all brought together under one banner. That's what you're trying to do. And if you think about the Roman Republic, this makes perfect sense, right? They don't have a king. The Romans got rid of the king, but they kept the idea of a consul, right? Someone who's still got the executive power. In fact, they had two consuls, so there was never usually one guy in power unless it became a dictator, which was a real office in Rome. It wasn't just some pejorative for a tyrannical ruler. It was an actual official office, but usually they had two consuls, and those consuls were kind of the combined executive, but they were looking to check each other. So you had the executive power, the rule of kind of the one, though split between two. And then you had the Senate, and the Senate was a body that was all about your hereditary clientele, right? Like, these are the people who were the patrons. They were the ones who were the patrician class. The senatorial class were old families, brought down from the original tribes of Rome. These are people who could call on a long and storied history of being part of the republic. And so they exerted the aristocratic or the oligarchic power. Remember, oligarch just means rule of a few. The good version is aristocracy. The bad version for Aristotle is oligarchy, but don't let that confuse you. When we're talking about the oligarchic power here, we're just talking about the rule of the few. And so they are going to express that rule of the few inside the mixed constitution. And then finally, you have like kind of the general assemblies, and those are the ones that are exerting the will of the people, right? So you have that mix of all of those. And inside the Roman Republic, there were different times when power was concentrated differently. The Senate, it was really the primary power inside of Rome. And so in many ways, you could call Rome an aristocratic republic. And that wouldn't be a contradiction, because inside of every republic, and Alexis de Tocqueville makes this point in Democracy in America, that inside every republic, there's no true mixed constitution, because some entity is going to have more power. One class, one focus is going to have more power. So in throughout most of Rome's history, you could have said it was, or at least Rome's history as a republic, you could have said that it was more of an aristocratic republic, as where perhaps you could say that America has been more of a democratic republic. So the word republic doesn't necessarily eliminate the role of democracy or eliminate the presence of necessarily an aristocracy, especially if we understand it in kind of this polity definition that we get from Aristotle here. So this is kind of the basic way we would understand where America lies inside this. When we say it has a republic, we're talking about it having a mixed government that certainly features democracy as one of the inputs in, but also has aristocratic restrictions inside it in its system and executive action. So all of these are kind of part of the system that is taking place. I want to get a little deeper into what these different sections look like, and more importantly, what would qualify people as a citizen in a republic, what gives a republic its specific character. I want to touch on Machiavelli. I want to talk on Madison and Hamilton. But before we get to all that, guys, let me tell you a little bit about ISI. Universities today aren't just neglecting real education, they're actively undermining it, and we can't let them get away with it. America was made for an educated and engaged citizenry. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is here to help. ISI offers programs and opportunities for conservative students across the country. ISI understands that conservatives and right-of-center students feel isolated on college campuses and that you're often fighting for your own reputation, dignity, and future. Through ISI, you can learn about what Russell Kirk called the permanent things, the philosophical and political teachings that shaped and made Western civilization great. ISI offers many opportunities to jumpstart your career. They have fellowships at some of the nation's top conservative publications like National Review, The American Conservative, and The College Thinker. If you're a graduate student, ISI offers funding opportunities to sponsor the next great generation of college professors. Through ISI, you can work with conservative thinkers who are making a difference. Thinkers like Chris Rufo, who currently has an ISI researcher helping him with his book. But perhaps most importantly, ISI offers college students a community of people that can help them grow. If you're a college student, ISI can help you start a student organization or a student newspaper or meet other like-minded students at their various conferences and events. ISI is here to educate the next generation of great Americans. To learn more, go to isi.org. That's isi.org. All right, so I'm going to be drawing from one of my favorite thinkers, and one that may not expect to be a big source on this topic, but actually is quite helpful, has quite a wealth of knowledge on this. I'm going to be talking about Machiavelli, and most people think of Machiavelli and they think of the prince, and they say, oh, well, Machiavelli, he talks about how monarchs can keep power and how they should be feared and instead of loved and all of these things. And so that's what he wants, right? He wants a monarchy. He wants one strong man to rule. Actually, that's not Machiavelli's actual preference when it comes to governance. In fact, most people just read The Prince and move on. But two of Machiavelli's books, especially this one, we have Discourses on Livy that you should definitely read. And then this one's a little more, if you want war tactics, his Art of War. It's not Sun Tzu. He's got his own Art of War. But that one also has some insights, it's mostly war tactics, but has some insights when it comes to the role of republics. And so I'm going to take a look at what Machiavelli said about what makes a republic, what are some of the key aspects, because you will see many of these aspects reflected in our founding fathers. If you look at the writings of Madison and Hamilton, in many ways, they reflect some of these understandings of what a republic is, because, of course, Machiavelli is a big fan of the Roman Republic. That's what Discourses on Livy is all about. It's him working through the Roman historian Livy, right? And he's looking at all these different things that happen through Roman history and, explaining why, lessons we can learn from them. And Rome was, of course, a republic. That's for a large amount of its time. That's the period he's mainly drawing on. So a lot of our lessons are on what we should do as republics. So if you want to read The Prince, then that's great, but that's just his advice to kings. When it comes to his advice to republics, that's Discourses on Livy. It's a longer book, but it is much more about the idea of what you should do as a republic, what defines a republic, what makes a republic, these things. So the first thing that he focuses on is virtue. He says that the thing that distinguishes a republic from a monarchy is that the people can rule And in this sense, he doesn't mean like mass democracy all the time. In fact, almost everybody in both the ancient world and from his time, kind of the late medieval, early kind of heading towards the Renaissance, anyone at that time would have looked at our system of democracy and been like, that's insane. In fact, in the Athenian democracy, which is what a lot of people like to point at, they say, oh, we're modeling ourselves off the Athenian democracy. But in the Athenian democracy, it's not like you could just walk into Athens and suddenly be a member of Athens. You didn't just become a citizen and you could start voting all the time. In Athens, the reason democracy was given any kind of weight, the only reason anyone thought democracy had any validity, was literally that the people were the instantiation of kind of the soul of the Athenian identity. The fact that they were related, that they had this history and this heritage and this tradition together, that they shared this culture, embodied the actual spirit of Athens. And so that's what gave them the authority, is that they were grounded in a very real sense, in every sense, and that really gave them authority to speak then into kind of the Athenian law. The idea that you could just raise your hand and pledge allegiance to Athens or something, or just have like a provisional ballot for Athenian democracy would have been insane. That would have made no sense to them. They'd be like, oh, you'll be overtaken by foreigners. In fact, that's literally Aristotle's point and several other ancient thinkers' points when it comes to membership inside a democracy. But back to Machiavelli's point, he says virtue is key, right? That's what gives people the ability to govern themselves and not need a king. If the people aren't virtuous, you need a king. He's got to organize everything for you. And that doesn't mean the king is perfect, but it just means he has the ability to exercise self-control. Remember, especially in Machiavelli's understanding, he's not thinking about Christian virtue. He's really thinking about ancient virtue. So it's not, oh, the king needs to be virtuous in all the ways that we think of in a Christian sense today, but more, perhaps the Aristotelian understanding of virtue, the self-control, having continence, having, finding the mean. These things are critical. Things like charity wouldn't really have ranked on his understanding. But he says the people need to be virtuous because they have to be able to govern themselves, right? That's really critical, that they have to be able to govern themselves. And that was what Aristotle said in this chart that I still have up, right? He's talking about the difference between the governances. Can you rule in the public interest, or are you so morally weak that you have to rule in your own interests, right? And the problem with a democracy is it's rule by the many that is ruling in the interests of the many. So literally, democracy is terrible for the simple fact that it is ruled by a lot of people who aren't virtuous, making decisions in their own self-interest. The same can be true of a tyranny or an oligarchy, right? That those are ruled by a few or rule of one, where they are only ruling in their own interests. They are not virtuous. They are not looking out. So looking out for the people. So in all cases, rule of the virtuous is best, right? That's the primary thing you want, is you need rule of the virtuous. If one is virtuous, then you get a benevolent dictator, you get a benevolent monarch, right? That's better than democracy, because it is ruled by someone who is virtuous, even if it's only one person. And if you have a class of people who are virtuous, a rule of a few, then you get an aristocracy. And if you have a rule of many who are virtuous, then we're heading towards what we would call a republic, right? Now, republics tend to have membership by one people, because you have to be looking out for the people, for the best. So you need to have a general understanding of who you are serving. If you don't have a specific people in mind, then you cannot be serving their interests. You can't be serving a public interest when there is no recognized public. So you need to have a understanding of who is the public in this scenario. It can't be everyone. That doesn't work, and that's never how any of these republics has ever been ruled. Another thing that Machiavelli identifies as critical to a republic is the rule of constitutions and institutions, right? These tend to cover more weight when you have, or bear more weight when you have a republic. It's not the rule of of men, as many people like to say, is the rule of law. Now, obviously, men are still enforcing the law, and this would be the first thing that Machiavelli or John Adams or James Madison would have told you, is that you have to have virtuous people implementing those laws. So yes, you can have the rule of law in the sense that we are referring to the authority of the law as opposed to the authority of the king. So we are referring to the authority of the institution, whether it be a constitution or law, as opposed to the authority of the monarch. However, if you don't have virtuous people enforcing those laws or those institutions, then they just don't matter. You don't get rid of the need for virtue by spreading the responsibility out among institutions and constitutions and laws. And that is a huge flaw that we have forgotten in the United States and most Western republics or democracies at this point. We've forgotten that it does not matter. You can't just put laws in place, put constitutions in place, put institutions in place, and just have them run themselves. That's not how it works. If you don't staff these things with virtuous people, if you don't have virtuous people running this stuff, then it doesn't matter if you invest the power in all of these other institutions. They will fail. It's not the institution or the Constitution that guarantees the freedom of the people. It is the virtue of the people that guarantees their liberty. You have to be free in the sense that you are free to pursue the good, and the good as understood by your common bonds and common people and common identity. Without those things, none of it makes sense. None of it works. It doesn't matter. Part of this virtue for Machiavelli specifically, but for all of these people in general, is actually the willingness to have self-sufficiency on a certain level, right? So what makes a person virtuous and worthy of citizenship in most republics is twofold. One, the ability to sustain yourself. So I have self-responsibility. I can feed myself. I can feed my family. I can protect myself. I can protect my family. I am a self-sustaining individual. So not somebody who is dependent on the state, not somebody who is a warden of the state, but somebody who is able to care for themselves and others. All the things that are under their authority, they are able to take care of. And also combat. Aristotle literally says in most constitutional governments, it is the people who are armed who are considered citizens. So the ability to bear arms on behalf of the nation is critical to your role as a citizen in any of these countries, any of these republics. This is echoed again by Machiavelli. Machiavelli's main point, if you want to read all of his work, you can read The Art of War, you can read Discourses on Livy, you can read The Prince. The common theme throughout all of them is mercenaries are bad, right? That's he's got plenty of other points, but his main point is that mercenaries are bad and you need citizen soldiers. In fact, Machiavelli specifically says you do not want standing armies in a republic. He says you don't want standing armies in general, but he says you don't want standing armies in a republic because standing armies mean people become specifically dependent on the state and its ability to wage war. It encourages you to go out and fight wars on a regular basis. It separates military service from citizenship that destroys the character of the republic. And so republics are places where literally service guarantees citizenship, which is why people who are reading Starship Troopers or watching the movie, yeah, I get it. Paul Verhoeven wanted it to be fascism. Ha ha ha. Very clever media literacy. The whole point is they are just aping the understanding of citizenship that came from antiquity, that came from Machiavelli, and ends up coming from the founding fathers, which I'll talk about in a second. But being willing to defend the country, to take on that personal responsibility is key to maintaining a republic. So if you are a citizen of a republic, you can take care of yourself, you can feed yourself, you can feed your family, anyone who's under your authority, you can take care of, and you can step up and defend the republic when necessary, which is why for most of Rome's republican phase, entering into the military was a privilege that allowed you to ascend the social ladder. The poor who couldn't afford their own equipment could not join the military and therefore could not ascend the social ladder of leadership. Combat military service is what showed that you were a citizen worthy of elevation. if you were too poor to buy your own equipment, if you were too cowardly to involve yourself in military service, then you simply were unworthy of leadership inside the Republic. And if you were a class that could afford more, the equestrian class were those that could afford a horse, and therefore, our idea of knights come from this. Roman knights goes into the Middle Ages. The people who were on horses were knights, right, in the armor. The idea that we even call things equestrian is tied to the horses, tied to that class. This is all part of what makes a republic a republic. And again, Machiavelli says the same thing. If the thing that keeps your republic virtuous, keeps the citizens inside your republic virtuous, is their ability to make war, is their ability to personally invest themselves in the defense and well-being of your nation. And lest you think that that was an outmoded idea that had lost any kind of gravity by the time America was founded, you can read the Federalist Papers. And in the Federalist Papers, in at least two, but I think there's more Federalist Papers. I think it's somewhere in the 50s. I've got it cited, but I didn't write it down right here, so I'll have to do that later. But in the Federalist Papers, on multiple occasions, you will see Hamilton arguing that the states had clauses in their state constitutions that said we will not have standing armies. And so they were very worried because, like Machiavelli, they believed standing armies allowed for the centralization of power, the desire to build empires, the constant need to use military might. And so they were very wary of the idea of having professional soldiers and standing armies. And they built that right into the state constitutions. And they were worried, many of the anti-federalists were worried that Hamilton and Madison and the rest of these federalists, they were going to try to build like a new king with a standing army that was going to control the United States. And so Hamilton, here doing a little bit of Machiavellianism, because he would eventually end up helping to build a standing army for the United States. But Hamilton, in that moment, argues, while he's trying to argue for the Constitution and why it's not a problem, he says, oh, don't worry. The whole reason we're going to have like this Constitution that gives power to the federal government to have the state militias work on their behalf is so that we don't have a standing army. So I need you to sign on to this Constitution that gives the government the ability to like levy taxes and have an army temporarily and draw on the state militias. But I only need that because that's going to prevent us from having a standing army. So Hamilton, even though a little, not a little, a very duplicitous here, ends up deceiving people into thinking he's against the standing army by saying, oh, well, I respect your worry about standing armies. And so I'm going to talk about in the Federalist Papers how this Constitution is going to prevent standing armies. And this is actually why the Second Amendment is so confusing for a lot of people, because the language of the Second Amendment actually makes that understanding clear, right? Well, of course, you need to be armed because you're a citizen of a republic. And a citizen of a republic is naturally going to be a Minuteman. He's naturally going to be a citizen soldier, a militia member. Now, we have moved well beyond that in the United States. We have a standing army. We have a professional army that is constantly maintaining an empire, doing exactly what everyone who's worried about standing armies said they were going to do. And so we've kind of left that behind, but we still like our Second Amendment. That's why the Second Amendment is so weird. That's why a lot of people end up arguing over it. I think it's very clear that the founders intended people to be able to defend themselves with firearms. But the Second Amendment is also there to make it clear that we are going to have a militia built up of people who own firearms so that we don't need to have an army. That was the whole point of the Second Amendment, was, yes, to protect your right to bear arms, but also because you're supposed to bear them on behalf of the state when it's required. That's what makes you a republic. And this was the Jeffersonian vision, right? The farmer who's the citizen soldier, right? That was his understanding. Every man will own a plot of property that he will sustain himself and his family on, that will give him dignity as a farmer. By the way, this is why so many throughout antiquity and the Middle Ages believe that land owning was more important than, say, making money. This is why a lot of people, including Jewish people in a lot of Europe were banned from being farmers because that was dignity reserved for the people who were of that land, right? And that's how many ended up moving into things like shopkeeping and finance that ultimately ended up becoming more powerful. But like this was the inborn idea of like what made you a citizen. You own the land, you were part of the family, you could protect your family and provide for the family. You could also provide for the security of the republic. So the membership in a republic is based on the idea that you are self-sufficient and that you are willing to step up and defend the state. This is something completely lost to Americans today, right? And I say this as someone who did not serve in the military, though I have lots of family and friends who did. My father was in the military. I lived on military bases. I have the highest respect for people who have, but I'm not saying this like to aggrandize myself. I have not been in military service. So by this definition, I would not be a citizen in a republic, or at least, as we understand it right now. And so this is important to understand this distinction, because what we're really going to hit is this break, right? And this is what people don't think about. This is what I've been harping on for a long time, and people don't think about it, is scale, right? Can republics scale? That's the question that you should really be asking when people ask, are we a republic? Because what people want to do is say that this form of government can just be applied to anything. We can turn anything into a republic. But that is not what the vast majority of people believe throughout history, including the classic political philosophers and even many of the Enlightenment philosophers. They did not believe that you can just take the republic and slap it onto anything, because a republic has to be a unified good, a unified understanding of what makes you a citizen, why you're involved. It's not just anybody can come in and vote at any time. Again, the United States didn't allow that. There wasn't, oh, well, just anybody walks in and can vote. That was not the way that the United States was set up. It's not how the Athenians were set up. It's not how the Romans were set up. That's not how any of these republics worked throughout history. But today we're like, well, if you come in, you're here for, I don't know, 5 years, maybe then you can vote, or maybe not. Maybe you just show up and we say you can vote because that's what the Democratic Party was pushing for. But the idea that universal suffrage is part of a republic is just not true. In fact, it was warned against multiple times across pretty much every philosopher who talked about this, because that was very much against the idea of what the republic would be. A republic is not a place where just everybody votes all the time like that. And it's not even a place where everyone votes for representatives and then those representatives vote all the time. No, there are very different and important selection criteria, many of which include being the head of a household, owning property, being willing to fight on behalf of the state. These are all things that were key aspects of citizenship in a republic across all of time. But we've eliminated basically all of that and just reduced it to living in a state, for a set number of years, living in a country for a set number of years. That's all it takes. And that just would have not been made sense to anyone, including our founding fathers. That would have just been ludicrous. Now, the problem of scale when it comes to republics is manyfold. First, the problem of scale when it comes to republics hits you when it comes to service in the military, right? You are simply not going to get every male to be involved or be eligible for military service as you expand out. That's not going to be the case. Now, a lot of people would say, well, look, Auron, it's the modern world, and we simply have to have standing armies today. So the classical definition of republics is just dead no matter what. Maybe you're right. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not sure if well-organized militias are completely out of check, but it's certainly, if you want to be a geopolitical power player who's going around and just knocking down anybody who disagrees with you, making sure that all your trade routes are secure 24/7, if you want to make sure that you have geopolitical influence in every sphere of the world all of the time, if you are looking to maintain an imperial presence, then yeah, you have to have a standing army. And this is something that Machiavelli, and again, Alexis de Tocqueville in this case, actually warned about, is the imperial democracy. That imperial democracies are gonna waste themselves relatively quickly, because they have to constantly expand, and they tend to only be interested in the enrichment of their citizens rather than virtue. And so they quickly trade virtue for enrichment, which means they start to see specialization, they start to see stratification inside their society. And all of a sudden you're in the scenario where you're not a group of equals working together towards a common good, but many different interests, a lot of which are aligned with foreign powers or based on working with powers outside of your country, and you end up just shattering the unified identity and the virtue of your republic. So that's one problem of scale: the constant need to conquer, the maintenance of a standing military. These are all things that were warned about when it comes to all of these political philosophers throughout history, if you want to maintain a republic. So if you want to keep a republic, one thing you really don't want to do is turn into an empire, because that's going to kind of doom you. De Tocqueville specifically talks about the scale. There's just too many people if you expand. The larger a republic gets, the harder it is for it to have a unified vision, a unified understanding. That's critical. Another thing that people recognize was critical to a republic actually is religion. Machiavelli is famously not a huge fan of Christianity, but even he understood that you need to have a religion that binds things together. Now, he was pretty cynical about that religion. He said, well, you just need it because it's the only thing that can compel people to do stuff that's not in their own self-interest, and we need it to like make people obey orders and pay taxes and stuff. But maybe they believe it, maybe they don't. Like he had that very cynical view, but either way, he recognized the critical importance of it. Alexis de Tocqueville, again, said religion was a critical aspect of the United States, binding it together. Obviously, our founding fathers, John Adams, and the famous quote about a moral and religious people, they all knew that this was critical. But the farther you expand, the harder it is to share this stuff. Now, something like Christianity, it's a pretty broad faith. It can expand out to some extent. But if you're trying to bring in a bunch of cultures with a bunch of different religions, if you want to bring Hindus and Muslims and Jews and everybody in and say, well, let's all be part of a republic, actually, no, like that's not how it works. You can have a tolerance for religion inside, like in like a Lockean sense. Okay, you can be any kind of like Christian, Protestant you want to be. Maybe even we'll expand it to all Christians, but certainly not to religions outside of Christianity and its different variants. This would simply not engender the unity and the identity necessary to maintain your status as a republic. The other problem with scale just becomes the representation, right? You have a hard time identifying men of merit and elevating them as you get larger. Too much of the job of selection is put into institutions and abstract categories rather than looking at what actually selects for greatness. So one of the problems that we just run into over and over again with a republic, if you want to maintain it, is scope. And so the last thing I want to talk to you about is like, okay, is America a republic? And if so, can we keep it? And if not, can we get back to it? So just going through some of the basic requirements we've laid out, is America a republic? Well, does it have a limited franchise based strictly on like land ownership and willingness to bear arms for the country? No, right? It does not. Is it a mixture of the interests of all aspects of society? Well, we could certainly say it was at the beginning. And I want to be clear, America was a republic at the beginning. It absolutely was founded as a republic, a democratic republic. It was certainly heavily weighted on the democratic end of the Republican formula, but it was a republic. People were required to own land. They were required to share, kind of the same faith. They were required to be able to basically wield firearms weapons on behalf of the nation. These are all things that were true of America, but it's simply not true now, right? So we simply don't have those things. Do we have a mix of interests like are required in the Republic? Well, again, we used to, but as I laid out in my book, The Total State, Gaetano Mosca pointed out why, no, actually, we've dissolved all of those interests. We've dissolved the idea because, and this might have been, I think that a lot of what the founders did was good and correct. But I think one problem in maintaining a republic that America probably ran into is our dissolving of social class, right? Now, the dissolving of social class is deeply ingrained in the American experience. And at first, that seems like it should help a republic. Again, Aristotle talks about this. He says that removing the differentiation between classes as much as possible helps for the maintenance of many of these governments. Machiavelli believed that actually the citizens should be relatively poor, but the public should be relatively, kind of the public treasury should be well funded in a republic. That keeps there from being these kind of like social clashes constantly, class divisions. But ultimately, there is a recognition that there are natural hierarchies and orders inside a society, and this will create social classes. And those different social classes pushing against each other is what makes a polity, which makes a mixed government work, right? It's the fact that the poor are not always in charge and the rich are not always in charge and the religious are not always in charge, but like the merchants and the atheists aren't in charge. Like you have this mixture, I shouldn't say atheists there because nobody liked the atheists, including John Locke, secular interests. These things are in tension with each other. They're pushing against each other. That is the actual interests set against interests that Montesquieu was talking about, that was talked about by Madison in Federalist 51, that these interests would check interests. That's what they're talking about. But because we dissolved all that down into mass democracy, oligarchs rule. Because really, mass democracy is just manipulation by people who have the most money. And so if you're in that scenario, then kind of money power rules the day. Whoever can buy enough, advertisements and move enough people with monetary incentives ends up winning. And in case you have any question of whether or not we're in that position, we literally had one side, the Democratic Party, which was funded by like George Soros and a ton of oligarchs, squaring off against the Republican Party, which was led by Donald Trump, who is a billionaire, who is heavily financed by Elon Musk and a cadre of his friends, including like David Sachs and these guys. So it really was a clash of oligarchs. That's kind of where we are right now. And so is America a republic? Well, do you need to be a landowner capable of sustaining a family to vote? No. Do you need to have a long history and tradition and religion tied to the United States to vote? No. Do you need to be able to bear arms on behalf of the state in order to vote? No. Okay. Do you have a mixture of interests that are well represented inside your Constitution? No. Do you have a virtuous people who have proven themselves to be capable of self-governance and therefore able to rule by selection of representatives that really show their interests and fight for the common good? No. So like by every metric, we're not a republic. We were a republic, but we aren't now. And that's hard for a lot of people to hear, but it's just true. And I don't like that any more than most people don't like it. But it is just objectively true if you go through any of the requirements for actually being a republic. If you're not just using republic as some quick retort that is ultimately interchangeable with democracy, but if you actually treat it as a category of governance defined by multiple political scientists and philosophers throughout history, then no, we just don't qualify as a republic. So if we aren't a republic, could we become a republic again? Yes. So Machiavelli actually outlines the way in which this is maintained. He says over time, and this is not an idea that is unique to him. Joseph de Maistre says this. Lots of political philosophers say this. I'm just keeping in the Machiavelli strain since that's where I've been through most of this talk. But the thing he notes is that governments over time shift and change, right? The people and the virtue of the people shifts and change. And so people might have been virtuous enough for a republic at one point and then not become virtuous enough for a republic at another. And it's very clear that we aren't virtuous enough in the United States to maintain a republic. And so we aren't one. And it's really that simple. Like if you're trying to speak with anyone on this issue, especially conservatives who are like, no, of course we're a republic. You're like, okay, well, what's the main thing to maintain a republic? Okay, like virtue, belief in God, these things. Are we a nation that does that? Are we virtuous? Do we believe it? Well, no. Okay. So that's just a basic, like, okay, if we need this to be a republic and we don't have this, are we a republic? No. Pretty simple. However, can you become a republic again? Well, yes, you need to be virtuous again, right? And there's a long road to that. In a lot of cases, it's believed that you need some time under the rule of a king. in order for the people to return to a place of virtue. Machiavelli puts it a little differently. What he says is virtue is part of a community, and that's a reference back to Aristotle. You can only be virtuous in community. But to create a community, you often have to do non-virtuous things, things that would not comport with the behavior of a virtuous man. So unvirtuous things have to be done in order to create a society that allows for virtue. And so he says, if you have a republic and the virtue is waning, if the Constitution is losing its control, then you might have to take measures that work outside the Constitution, that are extra constitutional or extra, would not be considered virtuous. But you have to take those actions to return yourself to a place where you can once again be ruled by these things. Now, that's not very specific, right? That could be very different in all kinds of different environments. But let's look at a couple things that we would need to do this, right? First, scale has to be a huge part of this. Again, we can't have a republic and maintain a globe-spanning empire. Just everybody throughout history recognized that's just not how it works. So if you want a republic again, if you want to be governed as a republic in the way that the founders wanted you to be, then you have to abandon this idea that you're going to rule the world and that you're going to have an influence all the world and that you're going to have this huge military that's wielded whenever you feel like you've been slighted somewhere or you want to keep markets open for some kind of company. Like, you just can't do that. You can't get yourself involved in every conflict in the Middle East and favor certain countries over others and have special relationships that require you to run to their aid every time someone, is mean to them. Like, these are not behaviors that a republic can maintain. You simply can't do that anymore. There's a real question if you can even maintain a republic over a continent, which is what America is now, right? Even if we withdraw all of our long-standing commitments in other places and we really focus just on the nation, we're still huge. We're still a massive nation that's allowed a lot of people in that shouldn't be here, and many of them are now citizens. So what are you going to do, right? So you have to shrink your ideas down, but even then you're facing a very difficult moment. So how are we going to turn into a republic again if we're going to do it at all? Well, you need to shrink down your focus, and you need to greatly emphasize a shared religion, a shared identity, and a shared civic duty, right? Not because people have to, not because you're conscripting people, right? Like, that is Machiavelli's point again. Conscripts are not what you're looking for. You're looking for people who want to fight for your country because the honor and the duty are what they care about. To take a Chesterton quote, Rome was not, men did not love Rome because it was great. It was great because men loved her. You have to have a group of people virtuous enough who care about your country enough to sacrifice just because it's the right thing to do, just because defending their families is honorable, just because granting that service to the common cause is an admirable thing. That is what God wants them to do, or what they see as important to their personal honor. That is what you need. And you simply can't have that unless you have a unified vision of like who you are and where you're going and what you want to do and what morality you share. These are not things that can be constantly up for debate. You cannot have a constantly shifting and moving understanding and definition of who we are as a people and what we believe and what is the higher good and what, you can't have these things and then ask people to sacrifice and have virtue based around them. They have to be a fixed point that people can aim towards if they want to become virtuous. I am virtuous because I act for the good of Americans and for the American ideal and the Christian faith that they follow, and because I am willing to defend my homeland and my family. Like, these things have to be tied to real things. They can't just be like, I believe in an idea. And like, no, that can't work. That's not going to allow for the level of virtue and the level of sacrifice that you're trying. You also, frankly, have to restrict the franchise. You can't just give it to anybody who walks in the door. And even if people have lived here for a certain amount of time, if they're not investing in the community, if they're not owning property and maintaining property and caring for the people under their authority and being willing to defend and be personally responsible for the protection of people, then you have to put restrictions on voting. And that's going to sound, again, the leftists run around, oh, that's fascism. That's fascism. Service guarantees citizenship. That's fascism. Nope. That's actually just what it means to be in a republic and a self-governing people. And you don't, like, I'm not making this up. Like, this is tied to every one of these political thinkers who had any interest in what a republic actually was. So if you want America to be a republic, and it just isn't one now, but if you want it to return to being a republic, you have to consider these issues. And none of them are easy, right? Walking away from empire is not easy. Telling people that they have to care about the United States, that they have to have a shared identity, a shared religion, a shared understanding of the good, that they have to prioritize the good of the nation over themselves, the people over themselves, that they, if they want to be involved in politics, they need to prove themselves, say, in military action or by demonstrating leadership ability and the ability to care for their community and to cultivate a piece of land or, watch over a family. Like, people are not going to like any of this, right? Like, this is an easy way to get called a, racist, fascist, whatever. But this is what is identified as being the things that make it a republic. And if you're actually interested in what a republic is, and you actually care about maintaining the system of government that you claim to say is so much better when you say we're a republic and not a democracy, you need to think about these issues. Because saying, oh, well, this can, this idea of a republic can just apply to 350 million people and eventually the globe because everyone's actually an American if they've ever eaten McDonald's or gone to Walmart. Like, you can't keep that conception of the United States and call it a republic. You can't do both. You can keep the modern conception of the United States, or you can discard it for a republic and return to a republic. You can't keep both visions in your head. And that is as hard for conservatives to hear as it is for the most wild leftists. Because at this point, most conservatives do define their country, let's just be honest, as a mass democracy. They might say, oh, it's a republic, but like outside of keeping the electoral college or something, they don't think about what that means, right? Yeah, you should keep the electoral college and the Senate and stuff, but there's a lot more to it. And if you don't address these issues, if you don't address these issues of identity and religion and virtue and scale and military service and everything else that made a republic what it is, then you just don't have a republic. And if you don't fix those things, then you're never going to have a republic again. And none of those are easy, and none of them are an easy sell. But guess what? You've been ruled by like globalist elites who completely don't care about your country and wouldn't sacrifice anything for this country ever. How's that going for you? Is that good? You enjoying that? Or do we need to return to something that ties the good of the leadership and the good of the people together? We don't have to have a monarchy to do that. We don't even have to have an aristocracy to do that. We can form a polity. We can form the constitutional republic, but we aren't one now by pretty much every definition necessary. And if we want to return again, we need to seriously rethink what we're doing. All right, guys. Let me switch over to the questions of the people here real quick. Jeff says, anti-Rushmore, 4 U.S. presidents to send to the crystals. Ooh, what are the 4 worst presidents? It's got to be Woodrow Wilson is on there for sure. People are not going to like this, but I'm going Lincoln and FDR. Obviously, those won't be popular picks, but they definitely brought us to this current state. And then we'll throw in Biden real quick or somebody. But I'll have to think about it a little more. Tiny Stupid Demon says, yes, there is no technical arrangement of government that escapes the need for those in power to be virtuous. Everyone needs to return their shopping carts. Yeah, exactly. That's why I kind of did the shopping cart nationalism in a way that's a little bit of a precursor here, right? If you don't have a society in which people return the shopping cart, you can't have a republic. That's really all there is to that. And then Robert Weinsfeld there just with the super chat. Thank you very much, sir. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, but thank you everybody for watching. If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, click the bell, notification, all that stuff so you know when the streams go live. Of course, everything also ends up on Rumble and Odyssey if you prefer those platforms. And then if you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, then you need to go to Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your favorite podcasts and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show. That has actually been growing quite a bit. Thank you very much. We're going to go well beyond 1 million downloads, this year, which is fantastic. So thank you for continuing to make that a success. And of course, if you would like to get my book on this topic, it touches on a lot of these things, though not everything here, but touches on a lot of the issues we touched on today. Of course, you can grab my book, The Total State, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or Be Virtuous and order it from your favorite local bookstore. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.